We're going to have brief presentations from all of the panelists and a bit of discussion up here on the stage. And we're also going to leave time at the end of the presentation for a bit of Q&A. So I'm going to kick this off with questions to make this a little bit interactive. Does your organization create content now for any kind of owned or social media? Show of hands. Everybody, yay. Do you know everybody in your organization who's creating said content? That is about a third of you as opposed to all of you. Where are your creative assets stored and managed? Do you guys know that? Do you have a CMS, a digital asset manager? Okay, hands are becoming less apparent. Do you have an editorial calendar? Okay, that's a little more hopeful. What about content-specific metrics? Yeah, this is getting a little anemic here. Do you have a channel strategy, what you publish where? Okay, that's better than expected. So there's a lot of challenges when companies organize for content marketing. This is what some research I'm going to publish next week is going to deal with. And by the way, I'm not trying to be promotional. All of our research is open research and freely downloadable from Altimeter Group's website. So I encourage you to help yourself once it appears, or give me your business card and I'll let you know when this publishes. But brands need to be publishers. Brands need to be media companies, and they need, much like media companies, to continually feed the beast. But the problem with content is that it gets created in silos. We know that content doesn't just reside in the marketing department. It comes from sales, it comes from customer service, it comes from your help channels, from your community, from social media. And these are not all groups that necessarily talk to each other across the organization, and this results in inconsistent messaging. And contents and channels are just proliferating. We're making content for own channels like our websites and blogs, for social media channels, for tablets, for phablets. Any minute now we're going to be creating content for things we haven't even touched yet, like Google Glass and smartwatches. This is getting more complicated, not less, and requires a lot more coordination. So that's why we're looking for some sort of orchestration. All of these dissonant notes and pieces and instruments, how do you create harmony? So I'm going to show you a not yet approved graphic that came in at 5 o'clock this morning that is Altimeter's framework on how companies are organizing for content. This is based on interviews with dozens of marketers, one of whom is sitting up here on stage. Leah participated in this research. We see a number of different ways, short of establishing right off the bat a chief content officer or a content department, that companies are coping with this initial challenge of organizing for content. Because, as I'm sure all of you know, you can't just go to the CMO and say, could we please have a budget to create this? We need it. Would that life were that easy? So we're seeing these models spring up. The first is a content center of excellence. It is transfunctional. It goes across the enterprise, in which groups come together, such as executive management, IT, social media, marketing, branding, Marcom, and it is a division that helps content function throughout the organization, that answers questions, that provides training, leadership, and best practices. Another model we're seeing emerge is an editorial board, which some organizations call a content council. This tends to be a very, very tactical solution, but it is a body that meets fairly frequently, ideally several times a week, if not daily, sometimes as little as once a week, to help align content around central plans like an editorial calendar, to share ideas, to share channels, to share creative assets, so that there's some sense of the right hand knowing what the left hand is doing. And obviously this can be like an octopus and have more than just two hands. Finally, there's a content lead. This is an executive role, but it's rarely a senior executive role. Dell, for example, has Stephanie Losi, who I'm about to have lunch with today. She is editor-in-chief at Dell. Intel has Brian Rhodes. He is their global content strategist. This is one person looking out across the organization and coordinating and supervising content initiatives. There's also executive steering committees. This is something new. Dell is just forming one now. And this is supposed to be a more strategic answer to the editorial board, which tends to be very, very tactical. The editorial steering committee looks more at content strategy, looks more at overarching metrics. And they're looking at ideas for content and strategic direction for content that could be spread not just across the organization with an executive champion, but also across agencies and vendors, which these committees very often do not have purview over. At the top of the heap is a cross-functional content chief. I always hesitate to use the term chief content officer because while everybody grasps that concept immediately, people, particularly CMOs and corporate boards, really balk at the idea of having another C-level executive. So even starting this with cross-functional, which starts with a C, can be playing with fire. Very often this is the chief digital strategist, or I met somebody here yesterday in San Francisco who is a vice president of marketing and content. The idea is that this person has executive purview, but more importantly, cross-functional purview so that they can reach into IT and get solutions made or done or acquired, or reach into community or reach into social media and not face these blockades and roadblocks that people often tend to face when they're less senior executives in organizations who don't have the authority to cross these siloed divisional boundaries. And finally, very, very mature companies have actual content departments or divisions. They're often headed by this content chief, not necessarily. Sometimes they reside under marketing. But I know you've got one, Leah. You've got a bevy of people working for you dedicated to content, dedicated not just hire a journalist resources, but perhaps a video studio on staff, graphic designers who are dedicated to the idea of content marketing, IT people who are supporting your CMS initiatives, et cetera. A lot of organizations are starting these, both large and small. This is particularly useful on an outsourced basis for large global enterprises who need to unify content not just across divisions, but across Asia, Europe, Latin America, and really culturally attuned content. So recommendations for organizations that are trying to make room for content is to lead with process. You need somebody who's got a cross-functional purview because content doesn't just live in one corner of the room. You need to find where your content is across the organization. This is really hard because most companies haven't systematized it. You need to develop a way of sharing it and of encouraging collaboration and some sort of central content repository. You need to identify dotted line reports because, I will say this once, I'll say it a million times, content can't live in silos. And you need to create processes. This is content strategy, approval, systems, structures, just like a newsroom has, so that people know how content operates, who approves it, what to do once it's live, and even a governance policy for once it's live and perhaps needs to be decommissioned. What to do with old content is becoming a really enormous problem for a lot of organizations. And you need to document this. You can't be the person, and I'm saying this as somebody who's run editorial operations, who, if they get hit by a bus tomorrow, brings the whole thing to a screeching halt. You need to share knowledge, and because it's very operational, it's very real time. So all of this stuff needs to be written down and approved and trained. You need to integrate content with paid media, with advertising, as well as with earned media, which is social, because content doesn't live in a vacuum. And we're seeing a lot of integrated media pop up on the horizon. That's going to talk about native advertising very soon. You need to train for content, both in terms of how it works for your brand and what content means and how to produce it relative to your organization. And you need different levels of training for different stakeholders, generally 3 levels. one for general content marketing staff, one for their management, and one for senior management, so that senior management can show up at a meeting or read a proposal and have some idea of what you're talking about. And we were just talking about this, Leah. You need to plan beyond the hire a journalist. You need to look at other forms of content than the written word, because content's becoming more visual and more audio-visual. So think about video, think about designers, think about photographers and images, how you're going to optimize them and how you're going to share them. You need visual storytelling and multi-platform considerations. You need the right people at the right time. You need these creative stakeholders to be brought in above the line as well as below the line, not at the last minute, so that people have strategic overview of initiatives. And you need to mate all of this stuff with technology. You need to be a stakeholder in technology. I cannot tell you how many people I interviewed for this report, and I asked them what CMS they had. They didn't know. Were they getting a new one? Yeah, but had IT asked them what their specifications or needs were? Absolutely not. You can't just work with the stuff that people give you. You have to know what it is, know what its capabilities are, and take advantage of the features and have some say over what features you want and you need. So you have to include IT in the governance structure for content marketing because their role is just too critical. And you need to involve stakeholders, all content stakeholders, in the scoping for your technology requirements, because otherwise you're never going to get what you want. And finally, and content people never love to hear this, but this is digital marketing, folks, you need to follow everything up with measurement. You need to define KPIs, align goals, constantly measure initiatives, and keep doing that and keep following up. You need to share and discuss results with stakeholders, tweak campaigns appropriately, and constantly evaluate your KPIs and your metrics. You might not know what to measure for initially, but if you don't start measuring, you're never going to get insights that are going to lead you to refinement and to optimization. And you also have to ensure that content metrics aren't at odds with the stakeholders' goals. This was a really interesting finding. We found out that sometimes social media people, for example, are supposed to create engaging content. That engagement isn't really a metric that aligns with ROI or lead generation or conversion. So without some alignment of his goals are this and my goals are that, you can have people working at cross purposes because they're working for diametrically opposite reasons. So that's all I've got to say now. I will have a lot more to say in a couple of weeks when this hits the streets. But let's go to Leah now and talk about how a real brand is busy with all of this alignment. I know you're going to switch machines here.
Okay, that works. Hi, everyone.
Cool.
I think this works. Thanks, Rebecca. Here we go. So I'm not sure how many of you know Qualcomm. If you do, raise your hand. Nice. More than I thought. Glad to hear that, because we're sort of on the real efforts now to build Qualcomm brand. We're really traditionally have been a B2B company. But you'll see a lot from Qualcomm yet to come, and so content marketing is really hugely important in our strategy to do so. So let's see. It's not changing. I'll just... Here we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I know I don't have very much time, so this is kind of tricking me today. Yeah, that's what I've been using. You have better fingers.
There's
You
one built
use.
in. Oh, okay. I'll use the other one.
Ian, I'm having real trouble with this machine. Maybe I'll just use. Sorry, you guys. Give me a second here. I'm just going to use this. Okay. Right, it's not my machine. So here we go. So Rebecca touched a little bit about converged content and convergence of paid, earned, and owned, and that's sort of what we're doing at Qualcomm. The way we see it is that paid, owned, and earned content are really blurring. Today, sometimes, banner ad is not necessarily what needs to be your ad. It's really compelling content that can become your ad. So we're looking at really this asymmetrical approach to marketing where our own content really drives a lot of how we activate today. With the smaller media budgets, that's what you really need to think about. Can your own content drive activation? And then using paid and earned, which is your PR and your advertising dollars, to really amplify that. And so that careful balance and this really holistic view around sort of how you amplify your content is really what we're trying to measure at Qualcomm. So what we're trying to achieve, and I think, again, Rebecca touched on that, every brand has to become a publisher. And if so, you really have to start thinking like one. That means really flipping the marketing model upside down. If you're a publisher, you have to come from the place of your audience. You really have to think about what readers want to see, what they want to read. Just like in the newsroom, just like in the magazine, people really think about eyeballs. And then you bring them to you, and then you deliver sort of this contextual content that really is interesting, authentic, and relevant to them. And that's difficult for marketers to do because we often think about pushing our message out. So we're really assessing what resonates with the target audience through the measurement. I'll talk a little bit about that. Sort of for us, it's cutting-edge consumers' next follower. So we're really thinking about what are those 18 through 34 male, females who are using their smartphone technologies, who are using their mobile devices, what's interesting to them. And that's the way to do is really testing type of content, whether it's long form, short form, whether it's written or video, it's multimedia. You really have to really take that mix all together and continuously test and experiment with content. Then you optimize it. And you really establish what's working, then really that helps to create effectiveness across sort of the marketing mix, whether it's social media or its own platforms, it's Facebook's or its different channels, YouTube. One example I'm going to show you from Qualcomm and what we've been working on is this own platform that we call Qualcomm Spark. Qualcomm Spark was born a year ago. It is really an independent entity that sits outside of Qualcomm website. This is sort of step number one. How do you create something authentic that people really start believing in and coming to? And in the age with 78% of consumers, according to TMG Media, said that brands that create compelling content and custom content are actually interested in building relationships with them. So with that, we created Spark, and it is a digital magazine, and it really based on the concept of journalism, really applying journalistic practices, applying the thinking that you would apply in the newsroom, having editorial calls every day, having your news being meaningful, and then testing your content. So we had really interesting contributors, and the reason we're able to get great contributors is because unlike sort of typical website where you highly sort of vet your messages, we actually vet our sources really carefully, and then we lightly vet their expressions. So it's a very objective medium. It has some provocative content on there. It's not necessarily always aligns with what Qualcomm has to say. But in general, we're talking about the ecosystem and the stories that are important within our ecosystem. We had a good year, 1.2 million views, about 100,000 views a month, and we're testing who these people are, and we're trying to see how we engage with them. And the way we do that are sort of three key strategies. We really talk, it's not just about creating compelling content, it's really thinking about distribution. So, one piece is push, is how we're seeding content outside of Spark. We're looking at long-form video, short-form video, paid units. I'm going to talk a bit about that in a moment. Then it's about pull and discovery. It's really bringing people to Spark and using technology discovery tools like StumbleUpon, for example, or Flipboard. And finally, the third model that we employ is this real hybrid. It's around the Spark content that we push out there and syndicate versus the licensing of these editorial units. And that's, I know we're going to talk about native advertising a little bit later, but it's really content that's unbranded but lives elsewhere. We license it, and it really allows our viewers to read content from Spark and various sources. So that's kind of the strategy, but at the core of all this is engagement. And so how we measure engagement, this is an interesting question because I think there's so many definitions of what engagement really means, and you really need to establish as you begin these programs what your strategy and how it aligns with your KPIs. And so for us, engagement may be visits to the site. For us, engagement may be sharing of the content. We're looking at all these things. We're collecting a lot of insights and data, and then we're sort of seeing how it performs for us, because we have to deliver. I mean, this is an investment. Another thing in the organization to think about, investing in something like this means hiring journalists, hiring video producers, hiring editors, having news calls. It's almost taking these people off sort of your regular marketing tasks that traditionally used to be in the marketing organization. That means repositioning your organization and finding new skill sets, finding the gaps. And so that's what we've done. One of the examples of this sort of converged media, earned, paid, and owned, that we just kind of had real great success with. It's just our latest campaign. It was really, we call it Best Bus Stop Ever, but it's really about a campaign that Qualcomm's running, talking about being born mobile, which is Qualcomm is, and a lot of the generation of people we're targeting are born mobile today, with tablet in hand, with smartphone in hand. So this campaign really integrated paid, earned, and owned in a way that I think really brought true amplification, that sort of holistic balance. I'm going to show you quickly the centerpiece of the campaign was a piece of content, which is video. And like I said, if you have great content, it really becomes your ad. You don't really necessarily need to invest in paid media as much as, unless you have a lot of dollars to invest. So let me quickly play this video, and then I can... Some results. We have over 5 million global views. We launched it across US and China, and we've had about 129 top media outlets actually writing about it, so millions of impressions generated. And reason for that is the content we think was compelling, but we also integrated and on the paid side, we actually, for the first time, partnered with BuzzFeed on a piece of sponsored content. So we worked with them together on creating these editorial stories, and that sort of amplified our story as well. Let's see if we can play that.
The only thing that ever crashes on my Mac is my Microsoft software. Is anyone from Microsoft here?
Hopefully we can play. If we can't, you guys can go on YouTube and just type in Best Bus Stop Ever, and hopefully you'll be entertained.
I understand you're looking for a ride?
We're able to track that these are actually cutting-edge consumers, the message resonated, and it was very simple. Learn about Qualcomm, learn about that this is the company that was born mobile, and sort of have this association. Quickly on the measurement, and then I'm done, I'm out of time. So in this case, I talked a little bit about push, pull, and hybrid, but in general, when you start your measurement, because content marketing is so fascinating, but it's also quite new, there is not enough industry benchmarks. And so because of that, what you really need to think about is collecting a lot of insights and a lot of data. And then you will sort of be able to establish your KPIs based on your strategy, but essentially collecting a lot of data, testing a lot of data, and then with push, we're testing long on short form, short content, what works, what doesn't work. With discovery, we're looking at traffic to the site, the views, the stickiness on the site, and finally with hybrid, we're looking at engagement. This sort of determines the right balance and optimizing for future planning. So that's the things we're doing at Qualcomm, and happy to take any questions later. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leah. And I'm going to just plug you. If you like that video, you should see another one on YouTube called Bug Circus that Leah and her group did, which is also very different but equally wonderful. Next up, we're going to hear from Ian Lurie. Do you want to use that?
Sure. Excuse me, sorry. A couple quick questions before I go to, actually, a little quick housekeeping first. I always go through these things at a almost kind of manic rate, so I set up a Bitly link bundle that has links to all the stuff that I'm about to blab out at you in the whole 7 minutes here. And eventually these slides will end up there too. Just kind of structurally, this is how my 7 minutes will go. There'll be ranting. I do rant a lot. But before I rant, I got some questions. How many people here have budgets that let them do video as part of their content marketing? You are lucky dogs. The rest of you, I know your pain because I run an agency, which means I work with lots and lots of clients all over the place. How many of you, if I ask you, what's the reason that you do search? I just gave away the answer. That's terrible. Why do you do content marketing? What's the first thing in your head? Ignoring my little... Start a conversation. See, he's not allowed to be here because he just gave the wrong answer. But no, that is what you should be doing. What I have found is that a lot of businesses seem to think that they need a certain amount of content for search, and they treat content sort of like this. I've worked with companies that sell wedding gowns, bulletproof vests, not both, either one, over the years. And long before content marketing was called content marketing, this is how they treated it, right? They take the content and they're kind of like, ugh, and they put it way over there, and they keep it as far away from the website as possible. In fact, if they could put it on a whole different website, so much the better. How many people here have had this experience? Okay, not that many. I'm dying here, guys. But for every great company that does, Coca-Cola style content, Qualcomm style content, there are thousands that don't just put content marketing in different silos. They take one silo and they put that silo somewhere else and they put all the content in it. And what I've discovered is that most companies seem to treat content as a disease. They're like, it's this horrible, nasty thing that we have to do, but if we're going to do it, we want to keep it as far away from our brand and e-commerce and all our essential functions as humanly possible. And some of that seems to be because a lot of folks see this as a massive investment that they can't back out, right? You can't figure out whether the content that you're putting up on your site is really going to generate a return or not. But you've already got content everywhere. And this is the thing that always gets me is people talk about content marketing, but I think before you talk about content marketing, you should get the marketing content you already have right. Content marketing is great. It's awesome. It has sold lots of stock, and it has made lots of people lots of money, because if you put that phrase in your proposals now, I get to increase the amount of my proposal by 50% just by saying content marketing. It's amazing, and I thank you all for that. But there has always been marketing content, and there will always be marketing content, whatever you call it. So I have a client that we worked with who very generously allowed us to use them as the case study here. This is David's Bridal. I'm not going to ask how many of you are married, because it's like 2 people are going to raise their hands, and that's going to be it. But for a variety of reasons, we couldn't do what you would consider a classic content marketing campaign. Right? We couldn't do separate content, put it on different sites, whatever. And as we looked around the site, we realized there's content all over this site. Right? There's images and product descriptions. There's content on category pages. And this is all really valuable stuff. I mean, thousands of pages of content. So we did 3 things. The first thing is we did create some additional content, But wherever we did, we put it with the brand. We put it on existing pages on the site, on pages that were already grabbing attention. So just as an example, this is a category page on their site. It's an existing page. We didn't have to go to the IT team and ask for another site or a different CMS or another page. Just went to an existing page and said, we want to put it here. And we put this there. It's expandable. It's on the same page as their logo and dresses and stuff, which is really good since they sell dresses and stuff. And because people tend to remember where they heard something more than they remember what they heard, this creates that sense of co-location of content and brand and call to action. And it's really, really important to keep this in mind. You've got to have that co-location eventually. If you don't, then you're generating a lot of awards, but you're not generating any revenue. And again, agency side, okay? I'm the guys down in Bartertown shoveling pig poop to try to make a living. That's what we're stuck doing. And we have to make this stuff pay. So we created little articles like this all over their site. We put them on category pages and product pages and About Us pages, on their home page, on the FAQ page, everywhere we could think of. And it created this sense of co-location. When people saw something useful, they'd say, oh yeah, I saw this thing on David's Bridal about picking the right size or right style dress, but I can't remember where. They would just type in davidsbridal.com, type in the search, they'd land on the right page. Which is very different from having to remember, let's see, I saw it on blog.weddingdressmanufacturer.com/dresses/size.html ? Yeah, it doesn't work very well. So it's all about place. The second thing we did is we went to the customer. And this sort of seems to get down into the weeds of search, and I'll explain why it doesn't in a minute. But the first thing is, if you think you're selling bridal gowns and your customers think you're selling wedding dresses, you're going to have problems. You need to close the gap. And the classic example I use from 18 years ago when I was starting with all this is athletic footwear or running shoes. You make the call. And there are very easy ways to check. So you can go on Google, who collects reams of data on this. Don't let this scare you, because trust me, they already know everything about us. You can go on Google and just start to type in a search query, and you'll start to see what other people search for. That includes that query. That's called Google Suggest. It's also one of the better data mining tools on the web. And learning these terms is not some kind of SEO trick. All right, this is not for search. This is not just for search. This is true in all media. All right, if you use the right words, you will get a better result. We went across about 300,000 pages on many, many clients' websites, and we looked at revenue generated by page, and we looked at the language and the topics on those pages, and we pulled out all the search revenue. So none of this is representing any clicks from Google or anything like that, paid or unpaid. And we're finding between a 10 and a 15% improvement in revenue per page if you use the right words. Because we want familiarity, right? Since we've been running away from saber-toothed tigers, if we knew where we were going, we were much more comfortable. So you walk people from the term that they want to use to the term that you want them to use. And that gets you a better result. It gets you pages like this where, again, they can make that transition on their own. This does not mean you should take keywords and stuff them on your page. This is not quite what I've seen, but I have seen things as bad as this. If you do this, you can go sit in the corner for at least a week, or preferably forever. Because again, this is not about search, this is marketing, and you've got to put together good, productive copy. And by the way, even if you are doing this just for search, if you think Google's never seen that kind of thing before, and they don't know what it is, I have really bad news for you. And we can talk about Google Panda after this presentation. So it's very important to just to do real marketing stuff that's really legit. And then finally, we wanted to find real questions to answer. You don't want to just babble. I need to get the word wedding dress. I need to talk about wedding dresses more. We need more wedding dresses content. Quick, do a video, write something. You want to find out what people are asking, especially in this kind of industry where it's a periodic purchase. Most people, it's once in their lifetime. It's the kind of purchase where 51% of people, it's once in their lifetime. I'm very cynical too, sorry. And you get those questions and you figure out, what do people need? And there's some great tools out there like Ubersuggest, which actually told us dress sizes is a big deal. You can go to Quora.com and look for questions with the most followers, and then you figure out what to write. And that's what we did, again and again and again. And did it pay? How do you measure whether it pays? Well, there's 3 ways we measure. We will track it as pass-through. So we'll look and say, okay, we know that longer time on site, if we can add 1 minute to everybody's time on site, the chances of their making a purchase goes up 50%. So our content's goal is to get people to stay on the site for 1 minute longer without just making the site load really slowly, in case you're thinking of that. That's not a good tactic. All right, so we measured that, and then we look at revenue over time, and we just compare. So we know when our campaign started, and know that dip was not because of us. They're in a seasonal business. Okay, but if you look year over year, you can see what happens to their revenue. And this is just organic search revenue. This is overall. And I'm just matching month to month, year over year. And those are their 3 critical months of the year. It had a huge impact. And the return on investment, if you count our time, their time, money spent on marketing the content, everything else, was about 10 to 1. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do content marketing. Remember, increases my proposal 50%. Really happy about it. But before you go nuts with content marketing, think about the marketing content. Get that stuff totally dialed in first. It's a lot easier. It's an easy win. I guarantee you there's things you can do. How many people here have e-commerce sites? Please, more than 2 people raise your hands, or working on e-commerce sites. Good. How many of you think you might be copying your content from like a feed or something like that? Yeah, see, jeez. Okay, I'm not asking any more questions. That's bad. So that's the first thing you should fix. And I would just say, once you've done all that, then you can start on content marketing. And there is that link bundle again. Thanks.
And then when you move beyond content marketing to native advertising, you're on to people like our next presenter, Matt Cohen from OneSpot.
All right. Let's see if we can get this set up here. I'm going to use this and this if possible. All right. Number 3. All right. Make sure everybody can hear me. That sounds good. All right. There we go. Here we go. Yeah, here we go. No? Okay.
We're a technical disaster.
Yeah, apparently.
See why no one's sitting in the front row now?
It's in the back. Did I do it right? All right, let's try. Yeah, while we're doing this, go ahead.
I'm gonna just ask the question of our panelists because you raised an interesting point, Leah, Ian, about content initiatives not necessarily launching on site. And I want to see what Leah and some of you have to say about this because and a lot of the marketers I'm talking to are saying this is due to the technology disconnect. Basically, the message I'm hearing is we launched on WordPress because we didn't want to wait 1.5 years to get into the IT queue. Oh, I might just leave this thought. And so I'm just curious in terms of the audience, are you doing content initiatives elsewhere because it's too hard to do them on your own.com? Can we have a show of hands if it's a yes?
Sure, y'all raise your hands for her.
Oh, they were, well, only about close to a half did. Are you finding that to be true as well at Qualcomm?
Yes, I mean, we launch most of our content on our properties, but we have long lead times for certain things that we cannot wait. So we sort of bypass sometimes and go to social channels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think this is something we're going to have to look a lot harder at in the future is why content lives where it lives, not necessarily because that's where it should live, but because IT is hard to deal with. And with that, we're going to move into native advertising and Matt's presentation.
Thank you all very much. I'm Matt Cohen. I'm the founder and president of OneSpot. And I'm going to talk about content and the customer journey. So all of us are familiar with traditional interruptive advertising and how it's not working so well anymore. As you can see, banner ad click-through rates alone have plummeted over the last few years. And so, of course, all of us are moving to content marketing. But the challenge is, how do you get it in front of the people that you want to see it? As Rebecca says, you have to think like an editorial team, and it's fine to create great content, but the hardest thing is to get it in front of the right person at the right time. So let's go back to basics. This guy, Elias St. Elmo Lewis, was inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame in the 1950s. In 1902, he said the mission of an advertisement is to attract a reader, to interest him, 1902, they didn't say him or her, and to convince them so that when they've read it, they believe it. So these things are still relevant today. In fact, these three steps are now called either the purchase funnel, the conversion funnel, or the customer journey. And he is actually credited with creating this idea over 100 years ago. So if you think of the different stages of the purchase process, I'm going to stay away from these connections here. You've got awareness. Does somebody know about you and the problem that you solve or the need that you serve? Consideration. Are they starting to think about you as a potential solution to their problem? Intent. Are they ready to take the next step and make that move to make a choice? Conversion. Obviously, this is what we're all focused on. And then even past the conversion, loyalty and advocacy, which in the age of social are more important than ever before. So when it comes to the types of content we're talking about, there's an enormous array of content that businesses want people to see. There's the owned media, blogs, videos, thought leadership pieces that might be on other people's sites that you've sponsored, white papers, webinars, articles, press releases, recipes, how-to tips, just an enormous amount of content that the business has created themselves, as well as earned media that other people have created that you still want people to see. So reviews, social media, news articles, interesting links, videos, anything that has someone talking about your product or service, or just gets them thinking about the problem that your business helps solve. The key is that of all this type of content, you've got to get the right content at the right time. As you might imagine, there's different type of content you would want someone to see at the awareness phase than they would at the advocacy phase. And the critical realization that people are making is that most of this content, in other words, content for 4 of these 6 different phases, is generally not seen first on your site. Clearly, if you're trying to create content to drive awareness, no one is going to see that content on your site. If they're aware of you, if they're on your site, they're already aware of you. And much of the content, particularly for a complex sale, where typically that's where you're creating the content, is aimed at helping people understand your product, your service, and the problem that you're solving. So there are a variety of solutions so far. And I think smart marketers are going to use a combination of these. I'm going to try to step out from behind here a little bit. So I'm just going to go over these one at a time a little bit. So a lot of people have started doing one-off publisher sponsorships, and that's natural in a new type of advertising. So an example would be a BuzzFeed type relationship like we were talking about with Qualcomm. These are great for initial campaigns, but they're tough to scale because you're only being distributed on a single site. It's typically a very custom ad unit, but it has the power of not feeling like a traditional ad. And the increased quality of the content, like the video that you saw before, means that you're breaking out of this sort of traditional advertorial style where it was really the marketer talking to their boss. Now it's the marketer talking to their audience. There are content discovery widgets, and you've probably seen things you might like elsewhere on the web. These are great for the first click if you have content that's fairly broadly applicable. You don't necessarily know who's coming, but it's a good way to drive large volumes of anonymous traffic. Obviously, search is important, but search can't help you if people don't know about your product in the first place. This is really for the intent stage where people already know what they want, they've started to look, But this doesn't help you if they don't know that you exist in the first place. Traditional display campaigns have been written off because they typically have terrible metrics. And that's often because they're all the way down at the call to action stage. Act now, do this, do that. And they're often interruptive. They're trying to get somebody who's currently trying to consume content to stop what they're doing and start shopping, they don't tell you enough about what's there. Obviously, social advertising is really the exemplar of where we're trying to go here. We're talking about Facebook advertising, Twitter advertising. It's native in that it's what the person is already doing. It's native to the experience. If you're looking at Facebook, you're looking at stories that people are posting. If you're looking at Twitter, you're looking at tweets, then a sponsored or promoted piece of content is natural. It's native. It's not interruptive. It's not getting people to stop what they're doing and go do something else. And it fits right into the flow of what people are already doing. So let me give you a couple of examples of some of the things that we're doing. Just as a little bit of background, OneSpot is a marketing platform that takes the content that businesses want people to see, either earned or owned, and distributes it using a variety of paid advertising channels. And we see results because of that, because of the content, that are anywhere from 2 to 50 times that of a traditional ad. So here's an example. The Adrenalist is a site created by Procter & Gamble, by their Degree antiperspirant brand. It's aimed at men, kind of young men who are into extreme sports and a lot of physical activity. And it's done in conjunction with high-quality content creators, including Bear Grylls, the former survival expert from the Discovery Channel. And what our system does is it transforms all of this content, dozens, hundreds, even thousands of pieces of content, into multiple different types of advertising. So here's an example. On the left is a banner ad. The system actually creates different multiple sizes of banner ads. It's pulling in the headline, the photo, social stats. All of this is done in an automated fashion. It's also creating a Facebook ad. It's creating a mobile ad. And as different types of paid content distribution become programmatic, our system will support those as well. So here's what it might look like on a page. So instead of it being an annoying, uninteresting, typical banner ad, what we're doing is we're taking what's available at a massive scale across virtually every website, a traditional ad spot, and turning it into a sponsored content module. So when someone clicks on this, it not only takes you to the Adrenalist page, but it also sets a cookie in your browser and uses the modern infrastructure of ad exchanges and retargeting to sequence the content. And as you can see, we have access to about 50 billion impressions every day, so we can sequence the content to what the person cares about. So here's an example from Rackspace, a customer who's just starting with us now. There's really 4 main categories of content that they're talking about in their case. On the left, we've got content that doesn't actually talk about them themselves, talk about Rackspace directly. It just identifies somebody who might be interested in cloud computing. The second category is exposing earned media, great press that they've gotten that otherwise would have rolled off the front page. So in this case, this is a review from CNN Money of what Rackspace is doing. It comes from a trusted source, and it helps extend, and not only extend, but identify the audience that they want to retarget. The next step is we take their owned media, and Rackspace produces something like 50,000 pieces of content a year across many different channels. And the system automatically figures out what content is right for the right person and delivers that in sequence over time. And then obviously, in their case, they're trying to get to a conversion. So at the very end, there's some sort of piece of content. That might be a webinar, a white paper, a social follow, an email sign up, or anything else. And so the idea here is that you're taking your entire content portfolio and mapping it to the various stages of the customer journey. And that can happen anywhere, and it can happen everywhere. Why does content work so well instead of traditional advertising? First, there's typically a very large pool of content to draw from. So that way you can make sure you have the right content for the right person at the right time. Everybody's at a different stage of that buying journey. Obviously, content tends to be much more interesting than a traditional ad. And because of the rich metadata behind the content, what is it about? What social stats does it have? Is it a video? Does it have a photo? What are the keywords in the content? There's a lot more data to to build on a user profile so that you can automatically target and retarget the right users over time. And most importantly, interesting content tends to persist over time. I'm sure the same thing is true of bridal gowns, that there's a very long purchase process. Typical automotive purchase is 6 months from when you decide you're interested in maybe buying a car when you drive off the lot. And so you're somebody who's interested in cloud computing today, someone who's interested in extreme sports today, is almost certainly going to care about those things 3 months from now, 6 months from now. And that's why we see the results that we have. So some things to take away and to remember for your content distribution strategy. First is that you should be building content for every different stage on the customer journey so that you're there to interact with people wherever they happen to be mentally along their process. Second is that from the very beginning, you need to have a distribution and audience development plan. If you look at print, for every $1 that's spent creating content, $3 to $6 is spent on distributing content. So moving away from if we build it, they will come, and really having a plan for how we're going to get the content in front of the people that we want to see it. And last is really focus on the right content, right person, right time, and integrate that into your editorial strategy. Think about where people are, and make sure that there's content there to meet their needs. So there you go.